righty. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back into another episode of Buzz Beat. Hope you're having a good one. We're recording this on Monday, November 25th, a few days out from Thanksgiving. This is Brian Geisinger. Today, I'll be joined by Darian. Richie Randall is producing, and today we're going to chat about Grant Williams here and the injury that was suffered over the weekend. Darian, I gotta say, man, I feel like people love using the term emergency podcast a lot, and we've used it a lot on BuzzBeat over the years. Which, by the way, just turned 8 years old. This podcast a week or so ago, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I feel like the term emergency pod feels a little bit more accurate now for the state of the Hornets roster heading into Monday night and what looks like, no Grant Williams for a very long period of time. But before we dive into all of that, Darian, happy early Thanksgiving to you and your family. How are you doing today?
Happy early Thanksgiving to you as well. And I mean, I'm feeling as good as I possibly can. I know that there has been some slight news about Mark and Nick Richards practicing with the G League team, but I don't feel like that compensates for losing Grant, which we'll get into. But yeah, I feel as good as I possibly can. LaMelo dropped 50. Brandon Miller had 30, 234, something like that. So our future is bright if we can just ever get there healthy.
Yeah, it's a big if, it feels like these days at the absolute least. And yeah, like you sort of touching on, like Grant is kind of guy, he's certainly not the best player on this roster. But he's probably one of the top 4 or 5, and just like he offers a set of skills that you can't really find anywhere else. This is not a particular like super deep team, but with a guy like Josh Green, there's a Cody Martin. Even with someone like LaMelo, I mean, you can't replace his playmaking and shot making is not replaceable, but there's a Trey Mann type, that can give you some of the ball handling and creation. And I guess maybe with Miles Bridges or something like that, you could say, or scaling up Cody Martin or Josh Green, maybe you can simulate some of Grant, but I don't know. It's really hard to see. But yeah, we're going to go through the injury update here. It's being reported as a torn ACL, meniscus, and like associated ligaments in the right knee. Williams suffered the injury in the fourth quarter of Saturday's 6-point loss to the Milwaukee Bucks. And then per Shams Charania of ESPN, it's still taking some time getting used to saying that. The Hornets on Sunday said that a preliminary diagnosis revealed an ACL tear, that Williams would be out indefinitely. And this just obviously it's a huge blow, and it adds to a pile of injuries that the Hornets have been dealing with all season, but a lot of which have been really like centered on the front court, right? I mean, Mark Williams hasn't played yet this season. Nick Richards is dealing with the rib injury. He's been out for a while now. Miles Bridges has been in and out. He's also not going to play tonight in the game against Orlando. Again, we're recording this Monday, November 15th. So yeah, Darian, just sort of like your initial, I know we've had, maybe a day or so now to sort of process this, but just your initial thoughts, when either you saw the injury or heard the news and the reports about Grant on Sunday.
So when I first saw the injury, I mean, it just looked like every other unfortunate ACL tear. Like it didn't
Yeah.
look anything different. So I immediately felt like I knew, but you never want to say that's what it is. But it definitely looked, if you go back and look at typical tears like that, that wasn't too far from the course, unfortunately. As far as like what this means going forward and just like the impact it has on his team. One of the immediate reactions I saw a lot of fans say, and I think a lot of it is that we want to be good. And honestly, people don't want to wait until next year again because waiting till next year just has not worked out for us. It may make the most sense, but it just year after year we're saying okay, well next year, well next year, well next year. Eventually has to be this year, but we don't know when that'll be. But one thing I saw was that okay, well, soon we'll get Mark back. Soon we'll get um, Nick Richards back. Miles will be back. Trey Mann, will be back. We'll be healthy. We'll be fine. And to an extent, I get it. But at the same time, with Grant Williams, I like that you mentioned that he's not necessarily the best player, but to do everything that Grant was able to do for this team, it will take Miles, Mark, Nick. Like he wasn't the best at just one thing, but he did a lot of things pretty well. And you're we don't have. I'm not gonna say we don't have another player because we have players, but maybe just not this particular skill set. We don't have a guy that can fill all those roles the way Grant was able to do so. So if a team's going five out, Grant has experience being a center, and then you really couldn't necessarily if if you're another team and you're trying to do the five out and you say, okay, well, we'll just put a bigger body and down the five. No, Grant can still stay in the lineup. We don't have that versatility anymore. The reason we were able to, I would say, even skate by not really having a big is one, of course, Musa has been doing Musa things, which we've grown accustomed to early this season. But Grant was a big part of that. Um, and losing him is just like we can't expect Mark Williams to come back and just be healthy and play. And then the same with Nick Richards. We can't expect him to be healthy and play. And then we talked about last pod just about the future of Nick Richards with the team as a whole. Uh, do you not, do you miss out on potentially getting some type of asset because you don't want to finish out the season with Mark Williams and Musa being here too big? Like it's just a lot of things up in the air. But just on the court wise, Grant was just so versatile and allowed us to play, give a lot of different looks. And just losing him, I don't think we're able to replicate that. I know we have Miles who kind of maybe fits that, and then you're hopefully getting two bigs, but I just don't think it's the same. And then not to mention Grant Williams is one of our 14 that shoots a lot of threes. He was one of our better 3-point shooters.
Mhm.
That's going to be huge, and I feel like a lot of people don't realize that. It's not like behind him we have more shooting.
Mhm.
The good shooters on this team is very limited. It's 3 to 4 people stat wise, and then that's it. Everybody else is struggling. So there's just a lot more than just this feels a lot more than just losing a player, which typically has happened in the past. It's just we lose another guy, but nah, this feels different.
Yeah, it's losing not just a player and a rotation player, but it's like losing access to a lot of stuff that this team did in terms of lineups, in terms of its versatility, in terms of some of the stuff that they could run offensively, both with Grant's ability to like facilitate in the high post. We saw that maybe a little bit more at the end of last season than we did this year with a healthy LaMelo, able to play on the ball more, but also just sort of like what he did in the screen and pop game. He's a good pick and pop shooter, and I thought he had like nice chemistry, with LaMelo in the pick and pop game, and obviously like his work as a handoff hub at the elbow and the high post, like that was really powerful with Brandon, even going back to last season as well. You look at the numbers, they're pretty good, but I do think they sort of only speak to a portion of his impact. Just under 30 minutes per game this season, 16 games, 7 starts. Grant was averaging 10 and a half points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal per game, 11% assist rate, 2.6% block rate. Pretty good numbers, sort of from like a slight advanced metric perspective. And again, like I said, just like that passing, his ability to work at the elbow with Miller, occasionally to be an outlet on the short roll, to pick and pop and make the extra pass, just like a smart, heady, make the next play, make the next pass, player to have in the half court. And like that will absolutely be missed. Was shooting the ball well this season, which noted Darian, 36.5% from deep on over 7.5 3-point attempts per 100 possessions, 55% on twos, 84% from the line. According to Cleaning the Glass, with Grant Williams on the floor this season, the Hornets were actually plus 2 points per 100 possessions, 118 offense, 116 defense. Lineups that had Grant Williams, LaMelo Ball, and Brandon Miller with a net rating of plus 4 points per 100 possessions scored nearly 1.2 points per possession on offense with those 3 on the court. Like you talked about, obviously, like what he can do sort of in the small ball 5 component, but obviously his ability to pass and shoot and guard different positions, like he could work as a 4. Some of the small ball lineups with Grant over 500 possessions this season. So again, like he was really important. He was the backup center right now, while also basically, being the backup 4 or occasionally the starting 4. Those lineups are pretty good though, too, with him at the 5 this year. And but Charlotte really started to like I would maybe maybe saying they were cooking with these lineups is maybe like a tad too heavy because it was a sort of a smaller sample. But like in the lineups with Grant and Musa Diabate playing the 4 or 5, regardless of the other three guys on the court, a net rating of plus 21 points per 100 possessions, with an offense that was scoring above 1.2 points per possession with a 44% offensive rebound rate, and a defense. You don't see this kind of number often with the Hornets going on for like a decade now. A defense that was allowing only 1 point per possession with those two on the court. Small sample. Who knows what it would have been, stretched out for a full season. We're not going to get to know now. But Grant's ability to play the 4 and the 5, and along with like different pick and roll coverages, we talked about it all the time on the pod. He could play center and be in drop coverage. He could switch out and guard a bunch of different perimeter player types. He also allowed Charlotte to cross match at times when defending teams that had like a non-shooting 4 or a wing. This is something we talked about on the pod as well too. Like you could play Grant as essentially as like the 4 on offense, but then have him guard opposing centers. And then you could either take Richards or Diabate and have them guard the non-shooter, stashed in the corner, and also have those guys roam around defensively and be disruptive at the back line. Like all that's gone. Like all those like sort of like fun junk coverages that Charles Lee was trying with Charlotte this year, it's gone. It's just, man, that stuff is out the window. And Grant was also the guy that like Charlotte could use to match up with like the front court cheat code players. And it's like, yeah, you're never going to like hold Giannis in check. You know what I mean? But like the plan for guarding Giannis, like it obviously like it's all 5 guys on the court, but like it also kind of starts with Grant being the guy in front of him too, going back to his time in Boston. But this is the guy that you would throw at guys like Jokic or Towns or Giannis, just like the guys that you have real no matchup solution for, but you have to try, and Grant's your best bet. And now, I mean, you're going to be asking, Miles Bridges if he's healthy to match up with these guys. Like, it's just probably not going to go great. It feels like in terms of like the rotation, as far as like what's on the roster starting this week, like Charles Lee's just going to have to redline Diabate. Like, I think he's going to have to play like 30 minutes a night, 30 plus minutes a night, because he's going to be sharing the center position with Taj Gibson. That's it right now. And Taj is a guy that I think he's here to be a veteran leader and the sort of like sage in the locker room. And I think he's had some nice moments here or there for the team, but like, you can't try, that guy can't be playing more than, 12, 15 minutes a night, like realistically, they're going to have to get creative and maybe play Dijon Salon certainly at the 4 more. I mean, he's got an opportunity here, I guess. And maybe they'll have to mix in at the 5 some as well. Maybe that opens up some stuff offensively or whatever. But no, I mean, there's just no real way to replace this. And it sucks. It sucks a lot. Like Grant he played well the final third of the season last year. He's playing well this year. And to just lose him like this when you were already very compromised at that 4 or 5 position, the front court room is just it's just brutal. So yeah, any other thoughts maybe on ways that Charles Lee and the staff could get creative with the rotation? Or, is there anyone you think they're maybe going to have to lean on a little bit more for playmaking? Like it feels like they're kind of already maxing out LaMelo and Miller to an extent when he comes off the bench. But like, again, Grant was a guy that a decent amount of the offense went through. So like, where does that come from and what can they try, Darian?
I mean, it's honestly going to have to come from maybe a combination of Miles and Cody Martin. I'm thinking
Yeah.
those are the 2 closest players, and this is speaking on Tajon being as raw as he is. But
Yeah.
Miles and Cody Martin are as close as you got to someone like Grant as far as overall skill set, or maybe impact. Maybe I should say instead of still skill set. So you're going to have to use them in ways. I think that maybe it'll be beneficial for Cody Martin because last year, well, and really just in the last couple of years, when he does play, he's been used more of like a lead ball handler at times.
Mm-hmm.
This time maybe he's kind of connecting a little more, so maybe that could help. I think Cody Martin's a pretty good passer. I mean, that's something that if we're talking we say old Cody Martin, but it's crazy to think that was only 2 years ago. Or, but older Cody Martin, he was a really good connector, and we thought that he could be, kind of more of somewhat to what how Grant is being used, but injuries unfortunately led him to be more of a lead ball handler, which that's not a role I want to see him in. So maybe he'll be more efficient this way. And then Miles, I think we've all before have mentioned that Miles is an underrated passer to an extent. Um, his role changed a lot during this season, so maybe he can get back to that. We'll see, but we don't even know if he'll be healthy. I mean, I'm not worried that it's like Miles is a season-ending injury, but what I am concerned about is Miles hasn't really, as long as he's been in the NBA, hasn't really dealt with an injury, and I think him coming back and getting re-injured is a testament to that. He has to get used to being injured, which is crazy to say, but it's nursing an injury is just different, and he probably has to get used to it. So I don't know if he's going to come back. I don't even know for the rest of the season that like it may just be like take some games off. We don't know. We don't know the direction of this team. I think it'll be easier to pick who's doing what. Maybe unfortunately we have to wait till trade deadline because then that's when we'll get a better
Mhm.
idea. But right now it's just going to have to be by committee, and unfortunately a lot of things have been by committee, like backup
Yeah.
point guard, center. So there's only so much these players can do. Even we can even talk about players we not may necessarily like, but even them, like there's only so much we can do to fill in all these gaps.
Yeah, I think you said the right names. I think Cody, I mean, maybe you can try some stuff with Josh Green. You're obviously gonna have to play smaller at times. So guys like Green and Martin, you're sort of in Bridges, you're sort of like more wingy, athletic, strong, stronger players in that position group. Like those guys probably have to scale up in terms of position. Maybe they'll have to play more zone defense. Maybe they have to junk it up more, try out the press a little bit more. I mean, they're just clearly going to have to play until something else happens.
Mm-hmm.
They have to like get it could be tough and like they're going to have to get like really, really creative. And then offensively, they'll just need LaMelo and Miller just to be ridiculous shot makers. That's sort of like the one strength they have going for them offensively is those guys are tall and can really do a lot of really like some special shot making things. And like you said, like I think ultimately like the future is in like good shape with the Hornets. Anyone who thought, I guess like my thing is like all of my comments on Grant and sort of like where the roster is has less to do with sort of like the Hornets like piecing this together so they can make a playoff push. Like that was never my goal for them this season. I think the objective from the start should have been they're not making the playoffs because of the 2025 first round pick obligation to San Antonio. So I thought, they're not going to make the playoffs this year, whether that happens like organically or at some point during the season, the team was just going to say, let's trade guys away. Let's have LaMelo pull a calf. You know what I mean? Like just do certain things to sort of like make sure that you got to a certain like floor. It doesn't feel like that's going to happen. That kind of stuff is happening now just because of so much of the injuries. And yeah, it's like, this is probably not the right thing to pull away from all of this, but like Grant Williams is a guy that like, if the Hornets were going to be shoppers at the trade deadline, he's a guy that I think some teams would have kicked around. Maybe not because he's got 2 more years after this one on his contract. Certainly not now because of the injury, obviously. But like a couple weeks ago, I guess it was 2-3 weeks ago, I did sort of like I had one of the writers from the Philly Voice, who beat writer covers the Sixers, reach out to me and wanted to talk about like Grant as a possible trade possibility for the Sixers. So I think he's a guy that probably could have commanded some interest in like that. That's, I mean, again, this is not the most important thing, but like that potential option, that's gone now too. So I think the question that we have to turn to now is, where do the Hornets go from here? Late last week on the 21st, I think that was last Thursday or Friday, from Hornets PR, Injury update: Hornet centers Nick Richards, first rib fracture, and Mark Williams, left foot tendon strain, have continued progressing in rehab from their injuries and have returned to group and team activities. Additional updates on their respective progress towards game availabilities will be provided as appropriate. The return to the team activities is sort of notable, especially as it comes to like Mark Williams. I think there was a Charles Lee quote at some point in the last few weeks that sort of said, that was a necessary step. Mark was working out or whatever, but until he started practicing with the team or practicing with, the Greensboro Swarm or whatever, there was no sort of like, imminent return for him beyond like until they got to this next step. So that seems big, but at this point, there's still no set return date to my knowledge, at least, publicly. So I don't know. It's like, I guess reinforcements could in theory be on the way, but it's like, especially with Mark, like obviously I'd like to see him back playing for Charlotte, but it's like this guy's, a back injury 11 months ago and now dealing with foot injury. He's 7'1", enormous frame. Like I would be very careful. Like I wouldn't be rushing him back. You know what I mean? I don't think they're going to be. This to me is a guy you only bring back when he's 100% ready, regardless of like what the rest of the sort of like roster stipulates. So I don't know. Darian, do you have any thoughts on? I mean, I don't know what you really could formulate here, because like we're not on the interior here, but just sort of like any general thoughts on Richards and Williams maybe making their returns to the lineup. Fingers crossed.
I agree with what you said about Mark, especially considering last year he came back and then for like a half, and then we never heard from him. He never touched the court again since then. So I definitely would be very very skeptical on just rushing him back. There's no need. I think you and I share the same sentiment that if this team made the playoffs, then fine. And honestly, if you were to tell me that Brandon Miller was playing this way, LaMelo was playing that, the way he's playing, and then we were fully healthy, I probably would have changed my tune, especially with the East being as even weaker than I anticipated,
Yeah.
more injury ridden than I anticipated. Like there definitely is a path there. That's why as the season kept progressing, it kind of made sense why people were saying it, just because it was almost like it was falling into our lap if we could just get healthy. But unfortunately, that just has not been the case. But for Mark, I really wouldn't rush him back. I mean, I definitely want to see him play. There's not necessarily a lot on the line, but the Hornets would have to look at center this year, even if Mark is back. It's just because of the fact that you don't know for sure. So I definitely want him to play, but if you rush him back, it can make things worse. But for Nick, I think that he has I don't know. They didn't really haven't given updates on Nick as far as we've gotten from Mark. Now, granted, Mark has been injured a lot longer, so maybe that's why we've gotten more updates. I don't really know what to expect from him, but honestly, we just need him to keep continuously doing what he was already doing. I don't think we need to ask him to do anything outside of the norm here. But yeah, that's really just going to be available when possible. I don't even know if I can really ask for them to play, a certain way or expect certain stats. It's just if possible, be available. You don't want to make the injuries worse. And then as far as trade deadline, you kind of touched on it with Grant. I really don't know. He was probably going to be the most valuable realistic piece. I say realistic in quotations because it's the NBA. Anybody's available, I guess, for the right price.
Mm-hmm.
But he was probably the most realistic piece. So now I'm just, I don't want Trey Mann to go. You can't get really much from Miicic. I don't know. I think the team is unfortunately stuck kind of where they're at.
Maybe Bridges, if like he started playing better and you shot it better, I mean, maybe that contract and just everything that Miles Bridges brings, plenty of which is not great. Maybe that would be enough of, I think there were teams that seemingly sniffed around him at the deadline last year or in this offseason for, sign and trade possibilities or just to sign him outright. And, everyone, ultimately he ended up back on the Hornets on, I guess, a pretty good number for Bridges, certainly. Maybe Richards potentially, but if the center position is in such dire straits, maybe you can't move off of him, maybe Cody Martin. I mean, like there's some possibilities. Like we'll know more. Like that's like let's like check back in on that in like 6 to 8 weeks, probably, you know. And the other thing, I just wanted to read off a couple, and I will say too, like I will say, I think we talked about this on the pod around the draft. Like, you know, I didn't want the Hornets to take Donovan Clingan just because I assumed, you know, Mark Williams was going to be ready to roll and be a big, you know, still like in on him. Obviously Clingan, I think, has had some nice moments for Portland so far this season, and like, you know, I don't know. It's like hindsight's 2020. I think they ultimately did okay in the draft, but just seeing Clingan do well, yeah, makes it makes
To
it
interject really quick, it didn't really seem that you bring that up, because I agree. Hindsight is 2020, but it's like, he was right there. But it didn't seem like Mark was all that healthy then either. So I'm kind of
Mhm.
curious as to what they saw, because even up to he had this foot injury, it wasn't like he was full team practice every day playing.
Mhm.
So even at that time of the draft, I'm pretty sure he was pretty far away. So I do wonder what they saw to
Yeah.
not, kick the tires on Klingon a little more.
Yeah, yeah. Gonna real quickly read off some of these comments in the chat. Appreciate a few of y'all participating along. Rod Boone asked Charles Lee about Mark Williams and Nick Richards practicing with the Swarm today. Said there was more contact in that setting than they've had in a while. That was appreciate Regulator for dropping that one in the chat. He also mentioned that LaMelo and Brandon Miller are among those who received consideration for Eastern Conference Player of the Week honors, which, you know, salute to those guys. They've been playing very well. Then, like, yeah, Matt Strain also mentioning Hornets PR today announced that Mark and Nick have both been assigned to the Swarm for rehab assignments. So, yeah, maybe that does mean that they'll be back sooner rather than later. Liberty lead SM says go sign Dwight. Yeah, let's relive 2018 all over again here. Let's go for
We
it.
thought he was washed in, and he had like a 20 rebound game, so maybe we can get his 10 this time.
He went on and won a title with the Lakers not too much longer after that. But sort of like speaking of some of the roster considerations, yeah, you know, as a result of the injury to Grant, the Hornets are allowed to apply for a $6.5 million disabled player exception. That number, by the way, is determined. It allows the team to sign a replacement player for 50% of the injured player's salary or for the amount of the non-taxpayer's mid-level exception, whichever is lesser. In this case, Williams' salary at 50% of a little over $13 million equates to $6.51 million. A few other details that Richie has expertly dropped into our doc here. The Hornets have the flexibility to use this exception, but need to open up a roster spot. Obviously, right now they're at 15, and that exception contract is just a one-season deal. They would have to apply for this exception by January 15th, 2025, and then they would have to use it before March 10th. Williams could still technically play for the Hornets, but if he plays the Hornets before the Hornets use the exception, it would therefore be declared extinguished. Again, Hornets are at 15 roster spots already. I suppose you could jettison Daquan Jeffries, and that would potentially free up a roster spot for you to use this exception. I will say, like, I think it could still, so like maybe that's a possible solution. It should be noted, Moussa Diabate is on this two-way contract. If he were ever to try to be converted at some point in time, does that, create sort of like a roster logjam in terms of like full-time players? So there's some stuff. It feels like there's a few things to sort of like navigate there in terms of like roster machinations and sort of like some of the levers the Hornets could pull. So yeah, they do have an exception that they could use, which is useful, but it would require them making some other like tougher decisions on the back end. Regulator has dropped some names in the comment. This is what Keith Smith, I'm guessing he either tweeted these out or maybe put it out on Blue Sky, but Keith Smith covers the NBA. Best current free agent centers on the market. These are some unbelievable names. Bismack Biyombo and Frank Kaminsky, too. Just absolutely blasts from the past names, man. It's
Let's get the band back.
man, it's feeling real 2017 in the chat right now, you guys, with the Dwight, Kaminsky, and Biyombo suggestions. But obviously, Biz is a guy that, like, good veteran leadership. And is a guy that LaMelo likes, if memory serves correctly, from when they were teammates earlier in LaMelo's playing career. So I don't know, Darian, do you have any thoughts that you want to offer up? If you're all out of ideas, that's understandable. But if you had any thoughts on how to maybe taper over this concern, I'm all ears here.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I did like that you brought up the thing about Musa, because if he's converted, then we
Yeah.
really won't even be able to use that exception.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you think about it, and there's other centers. Obviously, there's a position you look at, but there's other holes too. Like if we do go this route where eventually LaMelo just slowly stops playing, we don't have a backup point guard if Trey Man's not completely healthy.
Mhm.
And we saw Micic just can't do anything. Nick Smith Jr. is not really getting minutes like that. So that something you look at? Shooting is always a plus, but it really just depends on the mindset of the team. I think most importantly, what's more than likely going to happen is just Musa gets the contract, and then we're just kind of, like you said, log jammed. Unless like somebody's buying low on guys like Seth or something like that to
Yeah.
get some playoff shooting. But unless something like that happens, I don't think we do anything, and not really because incompetency of the front office, just more so. I don't think any GM wants to be in this spot, let alone a GM, first time lead GM at least.
Yeah, and I suppose there's still the outcome where, if in a week or so, you can just try to hold the fort down with Musa and Taj Gibson and Salon and Cody Martin and Bridges, splitting up your 4 or 5 minutes or whatever somehow. That Richards and Mark Williams return, and like maybe it's okay, you know what I mean? And so sort of all just right now, it understandably feels very tense, just in terms of sort of like how are they going to actually like assemble 48 minutes per game of center minutes right now, plus along with like what Grant was providing for them at the 4. Like we said earlier, you're not going to find a way to like replace, even if Richards and Williams or Mark Williams and Nick Richards come back, they're not going to give you the playmaking component in the shooting, obviously, that Grant did. It's like that's just gone. It doesn't exist anymore until Grant comes back. But it's just in terms of like being able to put like NBA level rotation players on the court and having like 9 or 10 of them per game, including a couple that are above 6'10", or at least can play minutes at the 4-5. Like having those two guys back would I think it ease some of the tension and anxiety. And yeah, if I was like unclear about that, I was not suggesting to use the designated player extension on Musa. I would imagine that's something that they would be doing for a player that's like technically a free agent, not like signing him to especially because it's a 1-year deal. Like if you're signing Musa, you're trying to do like one of those like multi-year contracts that have team options on them, for the minimum or sort of like whatever, and just try to lock him in at a incredibly team friendly, potentially below market number. But if you did that, it would just sort of like take up one of the roster spots and maybe make actually adding another player with that exception a little bit more difficult. But it just feels like they're going to need a little bit more patience. We'll see what things look like, in a week or two. Just wanted to throw this out here too. As far as 10-day contracts go, NBA teams can sign players with 4 years of service or fewer to 2-way contracts, allowing them to retain their rights while I'm looking at the wrong. Okay, here we go. Yeah, each season from early January to early April, NBA teams can sign free agents to 10-day contracts. Player can be signed to a maximum of 2 consecutive 10-day contracts before a team must either sign him for the remainder of the season or release him. So that's not like a safety, like that's not a lever they can pull right now either, too. So, yeah, it's going to require a little bit of patience, and hopefully guys like Mark and Richards getting healthy. And I just would say too, Regulator also says in the comments, maybe the Hornets could buy out Vasa. Contract next year is not guaranteed. Not a bad option. Man, what is up with Vasa this season too? He played well for Charlotte late last season. Since the preseason, he has looked like all out of sorts, man.
I don't think he wants to be here at all.
Just from the outside looking in, it does not. And again, I don't want to go down a whole other thing here since we're about to wrap it up. But man, like he was good last season for Charlotte. It's I was sort of banking on him being a guy that contributed this season. He's been borderline unplayable unless they absolutely have to get him in there. So, okay. All right, Darian, anything else to add? If not, we can go and wrap up our emergency Grant Williams pod here.
No, I'm done suffering for it.
Yeah. Yeah. There have been a few other people in the comments mentioning just like, asking, is the team cursed? Potentially, we don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out. Until then,
at least the Sinners are cursed. At least the center division has been cursed.
Very, very much. Couple other things to get in plug here before we close out. So obviously we haven't had as many episodes this season as we normally do. We still have our BuzzBeat Plus up and running. You can take advantage of all those perks like ad-free episodes and early access to those episodes by visiting buzzbeat.substack.com. More importantly, we have paused the billing on these so you can sign up with your email and get this private feed for free. Be sure to check that out if and when we turn the payment system back on. But I would also say like there's just kind of a cool community in there, people talking about the Hornets. So if you're looking for another place to sort of chat about the team within, I think is a pretty, like intelligent and fun community that talks and thinks too much about the Charlotte Hornets, that's not a bad place to seek it out. Lastly, we appreciate reviews on Apple Podcast. And this is one that I wanted to read, something that Richie has passed along to me. It's titled, quote, "The Best Hornets Pod." From the comment, even though BuzzBeat's frequency has taken a step back because of Richie's priorities, the quality is still the best among the Hornets podcast. The knowledge of the game shines through, as it always has since the inception of the pod. And yes, again, it's hard to believe it has been 8 years since Richie and Spencer started this, and then I joined them a few months later after that. But yeah, really appreciate the comment, in all those who have shared us or given us 5-star reviews over the years. As always, happy Thanksgiving, Darian, to you, to your family. Richie, likewise to your family as well. To everyone listening, upcoming games after Monday, the Hornets will play the Miami Heat on Wednesday, the New York Knicks on Friday, and Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks on Saturday. Thank you for listening.